Okay. Hi, and welcome to the fourth session. This is not the last session. B'ezras Hashem, there will probably be at least two more sessions. Maybe it might even continue somewhat after that into the wee hours of Erev Chanukah. B'ezras Hashem. Tonight's session is session number 4, and this one is called The Equation of Life, which you should have received the notes this afternoon. A little background to this. It's actually an amazing thing. Of all the things I've ever worked on in my entire life, this has probably generated the most excitement, and it's now at least 10, 15, I don't know, even 15, 20 years at this point in time. I don't remember. The Hanukkah material itself goes back at least 30, for me, at least 30 some odd years. The equation of life evolved over time as I got more immersed in the information of Hanukkah and the different meanings of the different numbers and all that. And I don't even, at this point, I don't even recall exactly what inspired me specifically to sit down with a piece of paper. I think it was just trying to manage all the information, and I will be sending out a chart. I should have done it already, but it's on my desktop right now. And after this year is over, I will send you the graphic representation of the material that we're going to be seeing tonight. It became a book unto itself called The Equation of Life, which is available soft cover through Amazon, Kindle file, and PDF through my website. It goes into more detail, even tying what happened in 2001, September 11th, 9/11, into the whole story, and it was a disaster and tragedy beyond comprehension, or at least very difficult to understand, but nonetheless it does fit into this framework somewhat. I think it's more meaningful to see what it might possibly mean in a more ultimate sense, not just a terrorist act, but something that was a message to the Jewish people, because everything by definition is a message to the Jewish people. God is talking to the Jewish people all the time. One of the reasons why I got involved in the whole concept of Geula and trying to ward off anti-Semitism was because when working on my first book, which was called The Unbroken Chain of a Jewish Tradition, I included a timeline to do with anti-Semitism. And the more I researched the topic, the more I began to wonder if either God was playing a trick on the Jewish people, a nasty one, meaning that we don't see coming, we don't understand why it happens, but just pops up and catches us by surprise, and then we suffer the consequences of it. Or does God, in fact, warn us and give us messages and talk to us and try to tell us what's coming up so we can, in fact, respond to it and make the necessary changes to protect ourselves from what might be coming up? And of course, the latter is the way that God works. God is the God who shows us tremendous rachamim. The very fact that we're still here today and we're giving a shir, and the Jewish people, 12, 13 million people at this point in time, a very small fraction of that acknowledging the reality of God and the centrality of Torah. And still, he has patience with us and gives us tremendous good and blesses us unbelievably. So clearly, he's a God of rachamim for so many different reasons. He doesn't need our approval and the proof for that. But the point is that if he is the God of Rachamim, then we have to understand that he's always trying to talk to us and warn us and tell us that we should know what's coming up so we can heed those messages and make the necessary preparations. And unfortunately, we tend not to do that. And the message gets louder and louder and louder. And we're trying to ward that off. We're trying to head that off and try to make the necessary changes in ourselves and in the world in order that we should be able to transition peacefully to Yemos HaMashiach without any more suffering. And the equation of life is a fundamental part of this, because they talk about in physics the concept of elegance. Elegance is usually something that's usually attributed to fancy restaurants or expensive furniture, things like that. But elegant in this case means that something works out so beautifully, so wonderfully, and so uncomplicatingly. Such a word actually exists, meaning that it's so smooth. So much is being said by so little. It's hard to imagine. And the truth is probably the most elegant equation in the history of mankind ever is Shema Yisrael, Hashem Elokeinu Hashem Echad, which we spoke about in previous sessions, not this webinar, but previous webinars, because that is the equation of everything. On one side, it's talking about to the Jewish people, telling us that everything that happens in creation, as the Mishnah Berurah points out, explains the halacha of the Shema and what we're supposed to think about while saying the words, not just "Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one." But what does that mean? It means that everything taking place in every part of the world at any point in time, and the smallest of the biggest of the widest of the, it's all from Hashem. All from Hashem. And these Parashiyot that we're reading right now up until Hanukkah are only about that message. It's all from HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Every force, everything, taking place, on a physical level, a spiritual level, it's all from HaKadosh Baruch Hu. So that's the Echad, right? Shema Yisrael, Hashem Elokeinu, Hashem Echad. Equals all of that, all of creation, all of history equals Hashem, because Hashem is called the Bala Koiches. He's the Koich of all the koiches. He's the force behind all the forces. The Nefesh HaChaim spends quite a few chapters emphasizing this point, that whatever is taking place, whatever is happening, it's electrons running through copper wire. Or now we have, what's that stuff called again? The one with the light going through it, I forget. But that new technology, but it's all Hashem, no matter how smart we get. And that's elegance. That everything in creation and everything in history, the parts that we can see and the parts that we can't see, can be summed up by one equation that seems so simple to be able to say and not think about and get distracted while saying it, right? But hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one. Well, this, in a sense, is even more elegant, because gematria, which is Torah numerology, it's the Kabbalah, it's all part of Kabbalah. Gematria is part of Kabbalah, even the simple ones. Every letter in the Aleph base has a numerical value assigned to it by God, given to Moshe and taught to us. It's part of Kabbalah. And gematrias get very complex, very complicated. You go to the Arizal's work and the Zohar too, but certainly the Arizal and some of the gematrias, like, whoa, it's like hard to imagine that things could work out. And names of God expanded equal this. It's complicated. But then once in a while you come across something that it's like right in front of your face. It's just it's so sublime. It's so simple. I mean, and we'll see what that is as we're going through it. But it's everything. This is really the equation of everything. In this incorporates everything that was ever made, all that's ever happened, all that's happening, all that will happen, everyone who's ever existed, everything we're supposed to think about to accomplish, it's all in this equation. Of course, the amazing thing, perhaps the most amazing thing about this equation, is it shows up nowhere. Nowhere. No one talks about it. It's not written down anywhere except in the books that I've written, at least to my knowledge. I haven't found anything yet in terms of how we're actually talking about it. But philosophically, hashkafically, and in terms of the material, well, this equation just emerged out of all of that. It's like literally just all I did was take the ideas that have existed since creation and really before creation, and have been brought up by the greatest rabbis of history. Kabbalah, the simple levels, the complicated levels, whatever information I had available to me, I took that and I mapped it out on a piece of paper so I could keep track of it and I could find the connections, because of all the holidays I've ever had to work on or ever chose to work on, nothing has had as much information and as many connections as Hanukkah. And this year, I actually spent some time looking at the Pri Tzaddik and Hanukkah, and he explains why that's the case, why Hanukkah is so unique in terms of all the Chagim, even the ones the Torah talks about. So, without further ado, we'll start now and we'll go through it. We spoke about last week, God willing, thank God, about the whole concept of 25 and what it means, and 36 and all that. We didn't put it all together yet, but we at least had an appreciation that 25 is not just any number, it's a specific number and for a specific reason, and it tells us something, and the number 36 tells us, but in simple and short, what the conclusion that we came to is 25 is a number that represents the primordial light of creation, the Or HaGenuz, the most powerful light to ever have been created, that ever existed and exists. It's in everything that's holy. Our souls are made from this light. The Torah is based upon this light. And when you access this light, you don't need guns anymore. You don't need nuclear missiles. You have to understand that all the physical things that we have in this world to protect us, to keep us going, to allow us to be able to live and function and accomplish, that we're so dependent upon, is because we don't access this light. Moshe Rabbeinu goes up on Mount Sinai, and for 40 days and for 40 nights, he doesn't eat, he doesn't drink, and he comes back in better shape than everybody else he left behind the camp. How did he do it? That's a miracle. Yeah, for sure it's a miracle. But how? What? Is it a miracle that it's only applicable to people on Mount Sinai receiving Torah? Is it something that we could apply to ourselves, to some degree? So it's this light. This light is so powerful. It's the light that miracles happen with. It's the light that the miracles that took place in the Talmud, and there are plenty of them, because they access this light. It's the light that runs through Torah. It's the light that runs through everything that's ever been important in history. All the Yitzis Mitzrayim happened with this light. The giving of Torah was with this light. And the final redemption, it should come in our time quickly, without any more suffering, will happen because of this light, with this light, the Or HaGenuz, the hidden light of creation. If you don't know about it, even people who are learning day and night don't understand what's actually happening through their learning, because if they did, they would access it more by maybe adjusting the way they're learning. Because, as the pre-Tzaddik points out, Rav Tzadok Cohen, that it's more than simply taking in the information and being able to argue it and being able to put it in perspective. It has to go all the way down to the heart, and then it transforms the person. Remember, the very first Parsha's Bereshit, when the light is created, in the fourth verse, when God hides the light, as Rashi points out, quoting the Talmud, and the Leshem explains, and this is so key. This is like everything. This Leshem is like a mind-opening, mind-blowing concept. Because until the Leshem came along, we thought the light was put away, hidden somewhere until Yemos HaMashiach. And then the Leshem tells us, no, it's available now. And tied to Chanukah. Because somebody who makes themselves into a fitting container, the type of person for whom God has reserved this light, the light will come to them and transform them. And for those who've done it already, those who've experienced it, we all have to some degree. If you're learning Torah, right, that feeling you get when you hear it, like, wow, that's an amazing idea. And you feel it inside you, right down to your bones. The excitement that it creates and generates, and the sense of hope that it delivers to a person, because you're being connected to a higher reality. A higher reality. We have to go up higher. That's what we have to do. This is the light. This is the vehicle. So let's go. Let's start, right? The Or HaGenuz is represented by the number 25, while still hidden. That's the conclusion we came to last week. And 36, once it's revealed. So normally a concept has one number, one gematria. The word itself, or, is a word. Aleph, Vav, Resh. Gematria 207. That's its number. But the Or HaGenuz, even though it's got its own gematria, is also represented by numbers because he or. And then the 36. And we learned that 25 is what represents the light while still hidden, wherever it's hidden. And there are really four principal places that the light's hidden. One is in the 36 Tzaddikim in every generation. They access this light. One is in the 36 hours of Erev Shabbos and 24 hours of Shabbos itself, because it's kind of a package deal. 12 hours Erev Shabbos, the 24 hours of Shabbos. That's why Erev Shabbos has a special status as opposed to other days of the week. And the 36 tractates of the Babylonian Talmud, or otherwise known as Torah Sheba'al Peh, the oral law. And the fourth is the Ner Shel Chanukah, which we light 36 over the course of 8 days. These are four principal places. But as Leshem explained, it's also inside of our soul. If you can access your soul, you're also accessing the Or HaGenuz. And if you learn Torah properly, you're accessing it. And it changes you, transforms you, it elevates you. And that's one of the reasons why the Jewish people, one of the main reasons why the Jewish people have lived supernaturally since their inception. Going back to the beginning, going back to Avraham, Yitzchak, and Yaakov, this light is the thread that allows the Jewish people to rise above the everyday mundane reality and not be affected by many of the things that pull down the rest of society. Oh, but today it's different. Today we seem to be just as affected by coronavirus and other illnesses that once upon a time didn't seem to affect us as much. The Black Plague was blamed upon the Jewish people because they weren't as affected by it. So some people came up with reasons like, for example, we wash our hands all the time. And we're always washing our hands, so therefore we were less affected. But the truth is, back in those days, they didn't have, alcohol gel and liquid soap or any. The soaps they had were available to everybody, and more than likely manufactured by the gentle population. And certainly today, washing our hands, the ritual washing of our hands, which we do for after the bathroom or before eating bread and things like that, very often, if you ever look at a yeshiva, probably the number one vehicle to pass germs from one person to the next person is from the washing of hands, because they have a towel that hangs for everyone to use. Because of Corona, thank God, now we have paper towel everywhere. But before the coronavirus, people were using the same towel day in, day out. Not going to protect us from disease and things like that. One person suggested, or one theory was, because the Jewish people changed their wheat once a year. In fact, he wanted to say, this person, that this was the origin of Pesach, not Yetzias Mitzrayim. That the Jewish people caught on and they realized that wheat, develops bacteria and gets old and stale and all that. So once a year, we dumped the old stuff and brought in the new stuff. And that's the origin of Pesach, the person wanted to say. People don't do their homework and understand, at all what they're talking about. But why are they all looking for theories? Why are they all coming up with ideas? Because the bottom line is that there's something unique and strange about the Jewish people that can't be explained by natural means. The only person that I remember seeing that was brave enough, maybe smart enough, to notice this and speak about it was Mark Twain. Mark Twain wrote an article for Harper's Magazine way back at the beginning of the 19th century. And in this article, it's famous, especially in Kiruv circles. I remember at HaShavua, they had cards printed up with this quote itself to get the people to say, hey, the Jewish people are special. You're one of them. Why don't you check it out? And it's a source of pride for Jews. And Mark Twain is musing and saying, when you consider the percentage of the world's population that the Jews make up and how many times they've been attacked and exiled and this, they shouldn't be here today. That's the bottom line. And not only are they here today, but they are, disproportionately part of the medical profession and, others, just doesn't make sense. He says, you can go online and see the exact quote, how he says it. But that's the import of what he says, that the Jewish people don't make sense, naturally speaking. And he asked the question, what is the secret of his immortality, referring to the Jewish people? And this is it. This is it, the organus. And if we don't access it, and all the divine providence that goes along with it, then we go down, 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 and we become part of the Gentile world too. And once we do that, then God says, well, if you're going to live down there, then you have to live with the same level of divine providence. And then we start being affected by everything else, like the rest of the world. So this equation, Hanukkah, it came to separate us from the Greek philosophy, from the Hellenists, who tried to pull us down, tried to make us part of that society. Their idea of light is not our idea of light. Their idea of darkness, therefore, is not our idea of darkness. You'd think they'd be the same, but something's different. And that's why the word Yonah, as we spoke about in the first session, is really the word Yavan with a hey at the end. There's Yavan, the idea of investigating, and because the Yud and the Vav and the Nun Sofi, they get longer. Each one is a short one, then a medium one, then a long one, because the Greeks investigated. They wanted to understand. But when they couldn't come up with an answer that worked out, they let it go. They didn't go back to God. The hey at the end of Yonah, which represents the Jewish people, Yonah is a dove, right? And it symbolizes the Jewish people. The hey at the end means that, yeah, it's okay to investigate, and we do that and understand what you can, because God gave us the intelligence to do that and to take, to become masters over the world. That's right there in Parshas Bereshis. To use it in a kosher and holy way to advance society. Why not? But always bring it back to God in the end. That's the hey at the end of Yonah. Likewise, Tzion, which is the namesake of the Jewish people in the state of Gula, has the word Yevon inside of it, because there's something to that. And the tzaddik at the beginning, because you have to be a tzaddik. Otherwise, it's going to pull you away and you become a Hellenist in your way of thinking. And that's not good. So, the Gemara says, from Parshas Noach, that it was Shem and Yafis who covered Noach, and they got this blessing. And it says that the beautiful part of Yevon will dwell in the tents of Shem, and for that reason, it's kosher. If a Sefer Torah is transliterated into using Greek letters, you can read it in public and be yotze the mitzvah, because that's the beautiful part of Yevon was the language, so to speak, Latin and all these. But beyond that, the philosophy is not our philosophy, and it pulls us away from the Or HaGanuz. They don't understand the Or HaGanuz because it's not relevant to them. There's a reason why they couldn't find that one jar of oil. There's a reason why. They went in and they looked. I mean, this is what the Greeks did. This, light into nations went in to the base of Mikdash and said, let's destroy all the symbols or the product of Jewish light. They don't like that light. And they wanted to break every single jar, and they couldn't find this one last one. And lo and behold, this one last one is the one that burns for 7 extra days. And where'd that come from? Well, it doesn't say where it came from. It just says, somehow they missed it. And destroying all the little, containers of Shemen Zayis with the seal of the Kohen Gadol on it, that they didn't see that they missed this one. We found it, but they couldn't find it. And they couldn't destroy everything. Usually when they destroy something, everything gets destroyed. But how did they miss it? Because they couldn't see it. Why couldn't they see it? Well, where'd it come from? So we explained that Yaakov Avinu found a jar with replenishing oil. He took it with him. That was a small jar he went back across the river for when he fought with the angel. And then he takes us with him everywhere he goes. And the Medrash goes so far as to say that every miracle we just had recently, the story was last week, I think it was, the Shunammite woman. Yeah, last week, the Shunammite woman, and the miracle with Elisha and the jars of oil. And the Medrash says every miracle that happens with oil, because there's quite a few of them in Tanakh, is with this oil that replenishes. Elisha says, these are all the containers you got? One little jar of oil spilling over. She becomes wealthy overnight, but from the Shemen Zayis. Now, since the Medrash says that because Yaakov Avinu went back across the river and was self-sacrificing for this little jar of oil, that he'll be rewarded, his descendants will be rewarded in the time of the Hashmonaim with a small jar of oil, means that God, protected this little jar of oil, that the Greeks couldn't find it. But the reality is that this oil is tied to the Or HaGanuz. And as Elisha says, you cannot access this light unless you have the proper character traits to access this light. So they could look right at it and not see it. Because that's the way the Or HaGanuz works. You can look right at it. Two people look at the exact same thing. One person said, wow, that's the hand of God. Hand of God, what are you talking about? In 1967, huge miracle, the 6-Day War. Such a miracle that they tell me, people who are alive at that time, or I've read, that even secular people in the streets of Tel Aviv were talking about the Messianic and Mashiach must be at hand. I don't know if today that would be the case, but back in 67. And someone got up, a general got up, and he said, miracle, miracle in Hebrew, right? It was the IDF. He didn't see the hand of God anywhere. How does it happen? Just pure arrogance? Well, that plays a role too. But it's because he was blind to it. His mind's eye couldn't conceive of this light because his character traits were not those that allowed the light to flow to him. So how do you develop yourself into a person to access this light? So that's the equation of life. That's why it's called the equation of light, because that's really what it is. It's an equation, and it's what life is all about. So 25 is the light while still hidden. 36 is the light while it's revealed. The number 25 first comes up as a gematria in the word Yehi. That we saw. The light to which this verse refers to as the organus, so the number 25 is linked to the light. That's what we saw. Kabbalistically, right, what's the significance of this number 25? It's because it has to do with something called the Nun Shari Bina. What are the Nun Shari Bina? Literally, the Nun is 50, the gematria of Nun is 50, and Shari are gates, and Bina is understanding. So there's something in Kabbalah called the 50 gates of understanding. What are they? Where are they? How do you access them? So they're not physical, they're spiritual. And to try to explain it in simpler terms, it's a complicated idea, one that's definitely worth researching and understanding, but we can simplify for the time being. And that is, whenever you learn something new for the first time and you hear it, it's abstract, no matter what it is. Somebody else may understand it. They may have heard it before. They can teach it over and they relate to it. But the first time a person hears an idea, it's abstract until they work it through. Sometimes simpler ideas can on the spot, you can get bina, understanding, but the more complicated the idea, the more time it takes. And that's called chachma. In this case, that's called, normally chachma means wisdom. In the spheres, it also means wisdom, but it's so high up, it corresponds really to the level of Kabbalah. It's so high up and so abstract that unless you're on that level already, like the Arizal, for example, you're going to have a tough time dealing with, understanding it. So you hear the idea for the first time, and you have this awareness of it. I know the idea exists because I just read it. I just heard a shir on it. I'm not quite sure what it means. When I first began to learn Kabbalah, it was different than learning Mishnah and learning Gemara. Chumash, the simple stories, you just read it like a book. There's lots of questions to be asked, but you can get by without them. Mishnah is a little bit more complicated, but again, for the most part, you can work it through. Gemara becomes more difficult, and there were some times I had to read something 2, 3, 4, 5 times before it finally sank in. I used to have a chavrusa way back at the beginning, a long time ago, and we worked through the Gemara, and we thought we had it. It made sense. We read the entire piece, put all of our understanding into it, and we got into the class thinking that this is the only way it could be understood, and this has to be right. And usually, in the beginning, within the first 2 to 5 minutes, we just heard exactly the opposite, and we were completely wrong. It took a while before we began to look and think like the Gemara, and made less mistakes, and were able to work out because you start to get more familiar with the concepts. But it can be worked out. People can work out the Gemara, especially today with art school, things like that. Even just reading it over and over again, you can pick up a lot more and more and more. It was rare that a person would see a concept in the Gemara and not understand it within a relatively short period of time. But there were some ideas in Kabbalah, some idea, that basically that I would read over and over again, and I would not understand what it was, and my mind was trying to figure out from the context of the idea what it was. I would understand everything else around it, and I would get to this word or this idea, and somehow it just wouldn't go in. And I remember there's one particular concept that it was very frustrating, very aggravating. I even asked for explanations, and the explanations somehow didn't work for me. And finally, after about a year to a year and a half, this idea just began to make sense. Almost as if God said, okay, you worked hard enough, you're frustrated enough, let me give it to you at that point in time. And that's Kabbalah. That's the idea of an abstract knowledge. And it can make perfect sense to you. And you teach it to somebody else. And it's like, what? What are you talking? What do you mean? What's it supposed to mean? So that we call it chachma. Bina is understanding. The word bina, it means a person understands a concept. It comes from the word bain. The word bain means between. Because very often when you learn a concept for the first time, it's like you can't get perspective. It's like your mind's trying to see it. And it's like literally right in front of your face, and you can't detach yourself from it. So you need some distance. Often people will say, let me think about that. Let me mull it over. Let me digest that. Let me, give me some time. What's going to happen in that time is basically as you begin to think about the idea more and more, a separation between you and the concept begins to develop until you can see Ki'ilu is outside yourself. When Adam and Chava were first created, they were created back to back. There was no back. There was two fronts. So why did they get married then? It wasn't like, Chava was created from scratch like Adam was. She was already there from the beginning. The Gemara says so. But they couldn't have a relationship. Because on one hand, you're two different people, but at the same hand, on the same token, you're one person. So like, what are you relating to? So what did God do? He did what's called Nasira in Kabbalah. He divided them. He cut them apart, made them separate. And when he did that, he made her Ezer Kenegdo, opposite him. So now there was a distance between Adam and Chava, and now that created the possibility of a relationship from that point onward. And that's the way it works with ideas too. We have to create a separation. There has to be a bain between us and the idea, and then you can have bina, understanding. Now, here's the important part. People think that it ends there, meaning that as long as I understand it. But you see, it's not true. For example, and pardon me if anyone still smokes, but you tell a person, that smoking is bad for your health and all, and they say, yeah, I heard that before. Do you understand why it's bad for your health? Well, yeah, it affects your lungs and things like that, and God forbid can cause cancer. And then you say to the person, and you still smoke? Well, I have a lot of stress, and I understand. I appreciate that, and then I'm sympathetic. I also have stress, but shouldn't you find a different way, a healthier way to deal with your stress? Well, it's so easy to pull a cigarette out, but it costs so much money. I know, but why? Why can't the person go that next step? Why does a person have to almost die before they wake up and change their way of thinking? Because there's a third step. And that's really where all the work comes in. In fact, we say it in our davening, you bless man with das, from you comes Deya Bina Vahaskos. In this case, Deya corresponds to the Chachma, it's abstract knowledge, Bina we spoke about. And then there's this thing called Haskel, understanding, comprehension, where it gets to the point where you're like one with the idea. You're integrating it. It's so real. And this is the test of how much you believe in something. The moment that violation of the idea means a violation of self, you're one with the concept. And that's what has to happen with Torah. A person has to be consistent. It's okay to say, listen, I'm not there yet. I know what I have to do. I know what I have to change, but I'm not there yet. That at least leaves room for that growth. But when a person learns something and thinks that they're doing it, and they believe it's enough in terms of their service to God, well, that becomes hypocrisy. And that's when things usually go south for the Jewish people. When you get enough of that hypocrisy, then it's a bad situation. And so you have to have these three levels. So now, the 50 gates of understanding. So then what are they? So how do you get from abstract knowledge to understanding? Well, it gets filtered. Knowledge gets filtered, goes into your head. You hear something. You've got a data bank, just like a computer, and your brain is programmed to go looking for explanations, understanding, and connecting. Because we don't like to be left, with questions. It bothers us. We don't like to, it's hard to say, well, so I won't know this idea. I don't understand it. It bothers us. We like to understand it. It becomes part of our worldview. We don't want to have to know or think that maybe there might be knowledge out there that's important to know that we don't relate to, don't connect with yet. At least that's what we should feel. And you have to be able to get to that level of bina. So this filtering process, which takes place very Kabbalistically, although we take it for granted, these 50 gates of understanding are part of that filtering process on the way to making the knowledge what we call Haskel. Bina first, to understand it, so you can begin the process of integration. And the last level called Haskel. That's the 50 gates of understanding in a very simplistic manner. So according to Kabbalah, apparently, 25 of the levels of the 50, the Nun Shari Bina, we're supposed to go to Zer Ampin. What is Zer Ampin? Who's Zer Ampin? Literally, it means small face. It's a Kabbalistic term, yes. It corresponds to 6 spheres: Chesed, Gevur, Tiferes, Netzach, Hod Yesod, which we spoke about previously, meaning that it's a system by which God sends his light down to us. It gets filtered. They're called spheres. The spheres receive light, filter them, pass it down, so that we can have free will. We can physically exist, even though we're made from spiritual light. And those 6 spheres basically govern our 6,000 years. They're the cosmic DNA, or the spiritual DNA, that gives potential to each millennium. So the first millennium, for example, from creation to 1,000, which is before the flood, was governed by the sphere of chesed, which means kindness. And then the second millennium, right, is governed by the sphere of gevura. So the potential for every millennium is its sphere that is the base, just like my physical potential is based upon my physical DNA, not your physical DNA. That's going to affect you. So there are 6 spheres that govern our world, and 25 of these levels we're supposed to go to that. The other 25 levels, because there's another sphere located below those 6 called Malchus, which means kingdom. It's the final sphere that basically our reality exists within. And it was made incomplete. Why? So that we could participate in its perfection. If it was made complete from day one, there'd be nothing for man to do except retire into the Garden of Eden forever. And that's not what God wanted. He wanted people to earn their portion of the world to come. So therefore, he left over something. And as a result of that, it did not get all of its 25 levels. How many levels did it get? 24. 24 and 24. That's, sound familiar? 25 and 24. That sound, if you recall the whole story, second episode of this discussion about Yaakov and his sons, and he loses the prophecy, and he says to his sons, is everything okay over here? And they say, Shema Yisrael, Hashem Elokeinu Hashem Echad. And he answers back and says, Baruch Shem Kavod Machuso, Le'olam Ve'ed. And the Zohar pointed out and said that he did not give it 25 letters like the Shema has, because the fact that he lost the prophecy meant that the world wasn't perfect yet. Yeah, 25, 24. The 25 is Irampin, corresponding to the Shema that the brothers said. The 24, Baruch Shem Kavod Machuso, that Yaakov said. All nice and neatly tied up inside. But that's the significance of the number 25. It has to do with the light that is supposed to go down to the Malchus, that we're here to bring out, that we do a mitzvah. You wake up in the morning and you wash your hands, you do negavas, you make a bracha on the tilas yadayim, you make a bracha on your food, you make a bracha in the bathroom, you learn Torah, you do a chesed, you light Shabbos candles. All of it, every last detail of it, is just to get that one light down to the bottom level and finish it off and give it to 25. So there's 50 altogether. And that is in Moshe Mashiach. That triggers the message. Just one light, just one, 6,000 years later, still working on that one light, because it's a little more complicated than that, clearly. But that's what it's about. That's the significance of the number 25. The light that's hidden. The Shema has 25 letters to tell the Jewish people, your job in being an Or L'Goyim, a light into the nations, is to bring that light down to the final level. That's the 25. The number 36, part 2. The association of number 36 with the hidden light of creation comes first and foremost from what we would call the Talmud Yerushalmi. The Talmud Yerushalmi is the Jerusalem Talmud. Most people are familiar with the Talmud in general. They may not realize that there actually are 2 Talmuds. They're talking about the exact same, and they're both based upon the exact same Mishnayos. The Mishnah is the structure. But there were Jews living in Babylonia, in the academies there, and there are Jews living in Eretz Yisrael at the same time, learning the same Torah. They recorded their conversations, their discussions, and halachic decisions in the Babylonian Talmud, or Talmud Bavli. And the people in Eretz Yisrael, they did theirs in what's called the Talmud Yerushalmi. And tremendous overlap, because first of all, they went back and forth a lot and shared the learning, and it's the same Mishnahs anyhow. And there's a lot of similarity, but a lot of differences too. A lot of things show up in one, not the other. Some sections are discussed in the Yerushalmi that aren't discussed in the Bavli, because the Bavli didn't have to deal with the laws of agriculture in Eretz Yisrael as much as the people living in Eretz Yisrael had to deal with it. And some Midrashim also. And this one is unique to the Talmud Yerushalmi. It does not show up in the Talmud Bavli. And it says that the light with which God made creation, the Or HaGenuz, this fantastic, primordial, special, supernatural light, shone for Adam Harishon in the Garden of Eden for 36 hours before it was finally hidden. The 12 hours of Erev Shabbos, which means from the morning onward till the Shabbos itself, and the 24 halachic hours of Shabbos itself. 36 hours altogether. Now, that might not be significant, except for the fact we already saw that when God asked Adam, "Where are you?" he used the word ayeka. He could have used that, ephata. That's what you say today. Where are you? Ephata. Ephat. That's today. You wouldn't say ayeka. Go try ayeka on an Israeli. What are you talking about? Talking, Bible over here? No. The only place, the entire Tanakh and the entire universe that we know of where ayeka shows up as a word is there, which the Medrash says is meant as a gematria, 36. So God says to Adam, 36. We translate it as, where are you? Because that's what makes sense. But it's a number, because God's asking about this light. God says you were created to bring this light down into the world. You've hidden it even more instead. So 36. So Kabbalah explains the significance of this number, right? Why it's so important. And again, this is complicated. If you read, there's lots of material behind this. This is a 1-hour presentation, so we have to basically refer to things more briefly. But the point is the point, that it comes out anyhow. God has different names. We know that. Right? One of those names that we're familiar with is the name Elokim, except it has a hey. We don't pronounce the hey as a kuf instead, because in deference to the holiness of God's name, Yud Kei Vav Kei, God's tetragrammaton name, we don't pronounce at all. Not today, because we're not holy enough. Times of the base of Mikdash, the temple, we were holy enough. We could say the name in a bracha the way it's supposed to be said. Everybody else is mistranslating it or transliterating it, incorrectly, but we don't pronounce it. It's a very, very holy name, and we pronounce it instead, the Aleph Dalet Nun Yud name, because of its holiness. But one of those names is Elokim. And Elokim is a name that basically denotes God's judgment, and also his working in a more mysterious way, where he's hidden within creation. Working what we call B'derech Teva. Now, there's no such thing as nature. Teva means nature, but there's no such thing as nature. All nature is consistent miracle. It's a miracle every time the sun rises and sets. It doesn't make a difference if it's been doing that for almost 781 years plus. Doesn't make a difference, because of the fact it's all the will of God. The moon comes out, it waxes, it wanes. Whatever happens in history doesn't make a difference. It's all God, right? But it happens so consistently. You can tell time by this thing. It just and Pesach but it's all unique. As the Nefesh HaChaim points out, that every single second, God is literally renewing creation. A major part of the miracle of life is the fact that I can give over this sentence and pick up the next second, even though I'm a whole new creation, this moment, right? As if it's just one creation the entire time through. It's you can't wrap your mind around that one. It's too impossible to understand. But God is God. He can do whatever he wants. He can do it very easily. It's just a function of his own will. We have to work things out, and then we're limited to how much we can control and affect. But this is basically as all of history works the exact same way, that it's seems to be a natural flow of time and events. That's a mistake. In fact, we get pulled in all the time, and we get very, very distracted by the situation, because of the fact that because it is so consistent. As people point out, the first time a doctor delivers a baby, it's the most fantastic thing in the world. 6 months later, he's praying they won't call him. Seen one burst, seen them all. If anything, just get more complicated sometimes. It's not really true. Each one's unique. Each one's different. Everything we do, and that's why making a bracha over going to the bathroom is such an important bracha, because it's a miracle every single time that your body is functioning as well as it does, because chas v'chalila, it can break down. So Elokim, as we mentioned last week by the Akedah, when Avraham says, you stay po with the donkey while we go ko, and the gematria po with the kola was 86, which is Elokim, right? That's the name Elokim. But Elokim is made up of two parts. The first part is Aleph Lamed Hey, and the last part is Yud Mem, Ela and Yud Mem. So the gematria, the numerical value of the Ela, Aleph 1, Lamed 30, Hey is 5, is 36. And the gematria of the Yud Mem is 10 plus 40 is 50. So therefore, Kabbalah explains, there's lots of verses in Tanakh that's based upon this idea. The Kabbalah explains that the Ela, the Aleph Lamed Hey, corresponds, of course, to the 6 spheres of Zer Ampin, the world in which we're living, because it has 6, each of the 6 spheres have 6 spheres during times of exile. So there's 36 spheres altogether. That's the Ela part. The Yud Mem corresponds to the 50. And the 50 we just saw corresponds to Bina. So what does that mean? What's that supposed to mean? Well, how do we exist? When you daven to Hashem, you need something. And you pray to Kosh Baruch Hu, please help me with the situation. What are you asking for? What's going to happen? Hashem just snaps his fingers, if he has fingers, and changes the situation? Well, he just wills it? Yeah, well, that's actually what happens, but there's a process to make it happen. And how does it happen? Well, your prayer goes up from this reality, from this world we're living in, through your mouth. You vocalize it. Starts hopefully with the heart, and then it becomes tefillah, and then it goes up to Shemaim as light. Just like, for example, in your brain, it gets what happens. All the input from your eyes, your nose, right, starts off as physical realities that triggers sensors inside your nose, your ears, your eyes, and it turns into neurons that go through the brain as the synapses, how our brains work. It becomes electrical information. It gets transformed. Well, that's the way it works in the spiritual world too. It starts off as our effort, our hishtadalus, the work that we do. But at some point in time, that gets transformed into light, divine light. And that light will actually go up to Shemaim as divine light. Now, depending upon how well you daven, how hard you put yourself into it, how much kavanah, how much intention you have, if you put a little intention, it goes like you have the amusement park, you hit that thing and it goes up and hits the bell. You hit it a little bit, just poof, it goes back down again. Hit it very hard, all the way hits the bell. Kavana, intention, is like booster rockets on the words of prayer to bring them up to Shemaim. God can hear you anywhere, on any level. But to make you work, to make you earn what you want, he wants your prayers to reach him as high as possible, at least high enough that the angels can take it all the way up to the heavenly court. Now, let's say you've done that. Your prayers have reached Shemaim. And Shemaim says, yes, this person is daven properly. This person is fitting to have what they're asking for. Let's give it to them. Now, how does it come back? What's the blessing? Well, the word brocha comes from the word brecha. Now, brecha is a stream. Brocha is a blessing. Brecha is a stream. It comes back as a stream of divine light. As light. Don't go looking into Shemaim for dollar bills to be falling down from the sky. It doesn't happen like that. It comes down as divine light, and somehow at some point in time, that divine light is going to be transformed into something physical that might be someone sending you a check you didn't expect to get in the mail, or physically having your foolish shlema that the doctor said could never possibly happen. But that's the blessing. Light goes up, light comes back down. Starts off physically, ends up spiritual. Starts off spiritual, ends up down here physical or spiritual, if that's what you need. It's a flow of light. So I prayed. I asked. I didn't get. What? They're short of money in Shemayim. They're short of blessing in Shemayim. They're short of Shidduchim in Shemayim. What are they? Are they busy up there? They left me on hold or something. Is there a customer relations department that I can speak to somebody? Is there a web address, right? God.com, something like that. Well, it has to do with the fact that the light, it's got to go up, it's got to come back down again. So why wouldn't it? Why wouldn't it? Well, what happens if you flick the light switch on and the light doesn't go on? You check the light bulb's good. Check your electrical bill, it's all paid, right? What's left? Well, you open up the switch to see if the wires are connected. Oh, look at that. One of the wires came out. That actually happened to me, right? One of the wires came out, didn't expect that, and that was fixed. Now it flows. If there's a disconnect between the level of Bina and the level of Zer Ampin, which controls our world, the light won't flow, not up and not down. So how does it happen? So if you look in Parashat Bashalach, for example, at the end of Parashat Bashalach, with the attack of Amalek, the Jewish nemesis and antithesis, and Rashi points out that the main thing that Amalek tries to do, and again, it's all important information. If you want more details, take a look at the equation of life. It's also in the letter 36, which I sent to people who signed up, signed up for the course. Right. The main thing that Amalek tries to do is divide between Yud-K and Vav-K of God's name. What does it mean to divide between two letters and two letters of God's name? So everything in Kabbalah is a conceptual reality. It's very simple. The moment that somebody loses track, forgets, loses perspective, that something just happened, it's directly from God. I met the Makolit. Right, and I'm going to buy something, that I need desperately. At least I think I need it desperately. There's one left on the shelf, and 15 seconds before I get my hand in it, someone else takes it, and I'm so frustrated because there was one left, and this person takes. And I really feel like saying, you understand? I came for this all the way down just to get this. This is mine. This person wanted it too. And I get upset at the person, or some, dings my car, or whatever the case, and I get upset. The Gemara says when a person loses their temper, showing anger to make a point when you're in control could be the right thing to do. But losing your temper, the Gemara says, is like worshiping idols. Why? Because if God meant for this to happen, do I have the right to get angry? If somebody wrongs me, I have a Torah obligation to tell them, excuse me, I'm sorry, I don't know if you realize, but by doing X, Y, and Z, you actually, hurt me or something, not in a way that's really permissible. So maybe you want to be more careful in the future, it's fine. But to be angry at the person as if they did something that God didn't agree to, that's idol worship, giving them power they don't have. I have to be connected. I have to see everything as coming from HaKadosh Baruch Hu. I have to rise above the everyday, mundane reality. Everybody else is involved in it. They're all creating it. Even religious Jews too. It's hard to escape, especially in today's world. It's very hard to escape it. And Amalek does that. And how does he do it? By distracting us. By making us focus on things that really get to us. They call them hot buttons, like sending people in to say things to us that get us, off guard. Can't say this, and that happens. I was really hoping for this result. I got that result, and I got really up. Just check it out. You're feeling that emotion inside, and as you're feeling it, you're not focused on God. And if you're saying things because you feel like you just got to get it off your chest, well, sometimes luckily you can do it anyhow, but ideally, you shouldn't have to do it. Look what Yosef does. His brother, Yaakov, has died. So the end of Parshas V'yechi. Yaakov Avinu has finally died after 147 years of life. And until that, the last 17 years, they're in Egypt. And every single day, they were invited to Yosef's table with their father. Now Yaakov has died, And Yosef stopped inviting them because he was worried about who to treat with more respect, not for what the reason they thought, but they were still feeling guilty for having sold Yosef. Now think, oh, you see, Yosef still harbors negative feelings towards us. And we have to go and tell him that Yaakov, our father, told us to tell him before he died that he shouldn't harm us. And Yosef knew clearly that was not the case. They lied. So Yosef says to his brothers, am I in place of God? I mean, you guys are God-fearing people, but am I in place of God? 10 candles, try to put out one and couldn't. You sold me into slavery because you wanted to sell me into slavery, but look what was going on. God sent me down here through your actions that I should be down here to become viceroy to save our people from dying from starvation because of the famine. That's what's going on over here. You're looking at the selling and but I'm telling you what really happened. It was all God, and I harbor no hard feelings towards you. That's a phenomenal level to get to, a phenomenal level. It's like the level that Yitzchak and Rivka on. How many spouses could ever deceive the other spouse the way that Rivka, and especially over something so important too, as Rivka deceived her husband and still stayed married, happily married after that. The only way you could do a thing like that is if you know that everything is from God. Because Yitzchak says, listen, for whatever reason, we couldn't do it together, but it wouldn't have happened. It wouldn't have succeeded if God didn't make it happen. So that's the first thing. God made that happen. Now, I have to examine whether there's any criticism to give to people involved, because even when the bad things happen to us, people are the agents for that, and they might have to answer for that later on. But the event itself, so every time a person is weak in being able to connect up what's happening in the world or to themselves, calmly connect up with the fact it's the hand of God. That's called a division between Yud K and Vav K. Because Yud K of Hashem's name is up there, doing all the miracles of life, and Vav K down here, okay, is the everyday world of nature, and they're completely connected. But the moment that we act as if God's not involved on any level, we lose track even for a second. It's a division in the name of God, and that's what Amalek tries to promote with the Holocaust, for example. Lots of people, how could God do that or allow that to happen? Therefore, there must be no God. That was a conclusion a lot of people came to as a result, because Amalek knows it. How did David HaMelech die? By distraction. The Sitra Achra, the Malachim, whatever, made a noise and distracted him away from his learning for a very short period of time, long enough to take his soul. That's what Amalek does. That's called the separation between the Yud Mem of Elokim, which corresponds to the level of Bina that feeds our world divine light, and the Eila of the lower world in which we live that controls our world. And what happens historically, there's a disconnect. The light doesn't flow. So therefore, it's very hard for our tefillas to go up. It's very hard for God to respond on the level that we're asking. It's not impossible. It's just hard, which means that basically you have to work a lot harder. If your father's in a good mood or your partner is in a good mood, it's easy to ask for something. If they're not in a good mood or they're having a difficult time, it's harder. You have to work hard. You have to be smarter and more careful, and maybe even be more patient. Have to wait for another time. So this is what the 36 represents, symbolizes. That we're talking about bringing one light down to the Malchus, to the world that governs our reality, so that everybody will see the reality of God. Just take a look around. Just ask one question. One question. Is the world leading towards belief in God or leaning away from belief in God? Is the world working towards Torah morality, or is it going away from Torah morality? If it's the former, it means the Aleph Lamed Hey of Elokim is being rejoined with the Yud Mem, and that's messianic. That's messianic. But if it's the opposite, if people are moving further, there's more spiritual darkness in the world, that means the Aleph Lamed Hey of Elokim and the Yud Mem are becoming more distant, and therefore the light's not coming down. And that's what makes it possible for people to do evil and get away with it, so to speak, temporarily, and for people to disbelieve and become, heretical in their thinking and still go on from day to day. Doesn't mean that God's not going to catch up with everybody. He does. But as Rashi points out in Parashat, V'yelech Hester Pari means that God does in a way that we can't always make the connection in our minds. That this happened and God's behind both. So that's the distinction, that's the division that undermines the purpose of creation. It has to be rectified. When we put the Aleph Lamed Hey back together again with the Yud Mem, and Elokim because it becomes a complete name, same as Yud Kim Vav becoming a complete name, then that is perfection. That is the end of history as we know it. That is the death of the Yetzer Hara. That is the beginning of the Messianic period. And we'll never go back again at that point. The Yetzer Hara will be gone from that point on. So that's the significance of the number 36, right? And when the prophet, we say it later every single day. The amazing thing is how many times we actually, hint to these things, or we're pointed in the direction of these things by just the prayers we say on a daily basis and the mitzvahs we do. But if no one points out and focuses you on what's actually behind it all, or you don't go looking for yourself, then we don't see it for ourselves and appreciate to be able to put into action and to benefit from it. Chanukah is a portal to the Messianic era. That's why its light will not require a unique holiday. And you must Mashiach, the first holiday to be canceled will be Chanukah. Why? Because every day will be Chanukah. It's a light from that period of time. On the 25th of Kislev, and 8 days later, a door opens, a window opens, where this light comes to us from a different level of reality altogether. It's accessible all year round if you do the work. But on Chanukah time, we'll see it provides an opportunity that's unparalleled the rest of the year, not even Pesach, not even Shavuos. Zman Torah Seinu, not on Sukkot. Purim, yes, because Purim is the other side of the coin in this discussion. But certainly Chanukah itself. And it's 9 o'clock, and it's fitting that we do this in two parts and not all at one time. You have the notes. You can look ahead. You can read the material. You can also go, do the research in the other books as well. But Rosh Hashem, we will continue this session. We'll tie up the rest of the equation of life, God willing, next week. And in the meantime, it's something to think about. Thanks for coming, and have a wonderful rest of your week.